In the last lesson we went ahead and split the whole application's UI by several different pieces, components. And today we also create another custom component to represent one nav item. And this nav item component we're going to create will store menu label and menu icon. So using already familiar technique, let's open up the nav component. Here we'll locate markup that is responsible to show nav item. It is this li element. Let's cut it from here and use custom component with the name nav item. Please also note that this time in component's name I haven't used prefix the. Component nav item is gonna be used more than once on one page, since we have 3 different menu items. So there will exist 3 such components at the same time. That said, let's create separate file with the name navitem.vue. Here we create template tag and paste components markup. Just to not forget, let's import this component inside of the nav component. And here we face a little problem. Let's take a look at the markup of nav item component. And here we notice that before we used v4 directive on this li element, just to repeatedly render markup of this element several times. But now, since we use custom component to represent every list item, this directive should no longer be specified on this li element. Instead, it should be moved from here and placed directly on nav item component. It's gonna work the same, and markup of nav item component will be rendered several times, depending on how many iterations we're gonna have in v4 loop. Also note that along with v4 directive, I have also moved the attribute key, which is used in combination with v4. And now that this problem is solved, let's go back to the nav item component once again. And here we also use dynamic component, which represents all our nav item icons. But since this nav item component will be a reusable component, which can represent any nav item regardless of an icon and a label, we should be able to specify from outside which icon as well as which label should be used for a particular nav item component. Thankfully, Vue provides us with a way to specify some parts of markup that should be injected within a particular component from outside. And this can be achieved by using a special tag here called slot. And now whatever we're gonna paste in between component tags is automatically going to be injected at the place of this slot tag. We're gonna specify this dynamic component called component in between nav item tags. So nav item component is gonna accept this markup and replace slot element with this specific markup. And visually, as we can see, we don't notice any difference, but in Vue Developer Tools, now we see that the nav component contains 3 custom components, each one represents nav item. So now let's again open up nav item component and notice that here inside of markup, we reference undefined variable page as a value for attribute href. And this value should also be configurable from outside, cause it will vary for different nav icon components. Let's move this attribute and place directly on nav item component where it is used. And by default, Vue will apply all custom attributes that are used on components, like this attribute href. It will apply it directly to component's root element, which in this case is a li element. But instead we need to apply the href attribute to this anchor. So we have to directly specify that this a tag should inherit all the attributes specified on component tags. And we do this by using vbind directive with the special object called $authors. This object will store all attributes specified on component tag. But this is still not enough to make custom attribute inheritance work. Firstly, we should prevent default attribute inheritance, so that component's root element will not inherit any attributes. And to disable such behavior, we have to create a script tag, in this case without setup keyword. This is important, otherwise an option we're gonna use is not going to work. In here we're gonna use a default export to export an object with options. And one option that we need is called inherit authors. And to disable default attribute inheritance, all we have to do is to specify in here value false. So after all that attribute href which was specified directly on nav item component will be automatically transferred and assigned to this anchor element within navItem component. This is exactly what we told Vue to do by using this vbind directive and disabling default attribute inheritance by using option inherit address. And after all that, it's finally time to check everything in the browser. By choosing navItem component, we can see on the right side which attributes it uses. And if we inspect the markup of any navItem component, sure enough, we will see the href attribute applied directly on the anchor tag. So our custom attribute inheritance works as expected.